Welcome to Trial by Wine. We take a closer look at crimes that highlight how fascinating humans can be. Schmidty, Swanee and Clarkey visit crimes and run them through their jury of three, debating both sides of the case to agree an appropriate, if totally fictitious, sentence. Please be advised, Trial by Wine may include explicit or disturbing content and will include drunken rambling. Listener discretion is advised. All right, how are we?
Wonderful.
Ooh,
Yep.
ooh.
Pretty swish here.
Little kiss.
I'm feeling good about myself after that last story that God would make anyone feel good about themselves.
True. Makes me feel like my relationship's quite sound. Can't see either of us plotting to murder each other for life insurance. I don't even think Tony's got any, actually. Any news in the last 2 seconds?
No.
No. Okay.
No, I do not.
No, just the addition of chocolate to the conversation from our end.
Okay.
lucky
All
you.
right. Yeah, lucky you indeed. All right. Well, I'll introduce us then. I'm Schmidty.
I'm Swanee.
And I'm Clarkey, because Schmidty pronounced that so well. And together we are Trial by Wine.
And what are we drinking? I think I can guess what Swanee's going to pull out. Oh, she's on a Coke Zero.
I haven't had a Coke Zero in a while, so let's have a
You're on the
Look at
hard
that.
stuff.
let's crack open one. I know. Look at me on the hard stuff.
A little trigger. And you boys, you're on that. Is that the
We're on
same?
the claw still, yeah.
Same bottle, yeah.
Okay, very nice. And I'm on
The red Corona.
another mango chutney.
Stella.
Yeah, I'm not happy with that rebrand. Well, it's not really a rebrand, the repackaging, I suppose it is, isn't it?
Mm.
It might look better in real life. It's not. It's like from me looking at it on
It's
screen.
not singing to us on
it
screen. is it?
says a Welsh beer. It looks like sort of Welsh colours maybe, and looks quite masculine for it.
It's more.
A pretty
If you were
drink.
looking at it, it's more orange
Pretty
than red.
I can
But-
kind of see it when I
is it?
poke my head in. Yeah, looks red from a distance.
It definitely brings the class value down.
From a
Yeah.
distance.
Yeah, I agree with that. Tastes just the same, so that's fine with me. All right, shall I tell you a story?
I'd love
Please
you
do.
to.
So I'll start with my sources. My sources are Wikipedia, news.com.au, skynews.com, bbc.com, theguardian.com, nzherald.co.nz, the documentary film The Lie, which is
Ooh.
available on Netflix, and I think that's about it. Possibly thesun.co.uk. Okay,
I've got
so
a
as
horrible
you know,
feeling that we watched this documentary the other week.
it's very good, very good.
Mm.
So after we finished Legally Blonde on Sunday and we did the bump out and then we had the cast party, I was, let's just say, a little worse for wear on Monday. And I had anticipated it, so I took the day off. And I was lying in bed and I decided to use the time to watch a bit of true crime TV. And as I said, I came across this magnificent documentary called The Lie. I will admit that I fell asleep on and off and had to go back a few times, but that was more to do with my hangover than the content.
Is hangover time the best time to watch true crime documentaries?
What happened was I was like, I'm going to edit all day Monday. And then I got home at about midday and then you had sent a note the night before saying, let's do a show. And I thought, I better get one ready then. I've got to do a story. So I parked the editing and then I thought, I'm so tired. I'll just find something and see if I can find a story that piques my interest. And so, yes, it turned out to be the best, but I must admit I fell asleep, I reckon, 6 times. And then I'd wake up and I'd have to go back to where I was. So the story
struggle
I'm
is
going to...
real. That's
It was. It
happens
was.
to me a
And
lot.
because I'm of a certain age, I'm not even past it today, a day later. Never mind.
but you wake up and go, did I miss something? Like,
I woke up and
is it
thought,
still
well,
in
I
the same trajectory?
certainly feel better, but I was still very tired today. So the story I'm going to tell you is the story of Grace Millane. Grace was born on the 2nd of December 1996 in Essex. She grew up with her 2 brothers in a loving family. By the time Grace was 21, she had graduated from the University of Lincoln with a bachelor's in advertising and marketing and had decided to take a gap year and go travelling. Yes, like us. Although I don't actually have a degree in marketing, just 30 years
Well,
experience.
my majors are in that. Well, my degree was actually in tourism, but my majors were advertising and marketing. So yeah.
Okay. Like you, Swanee, Grace was a lively, sociable and happy young woman.
Oh, that sounds like me.
Grace's first destination in her travels was South America, as you boys have fairly recently been. And then
Love it.
she went on to New Zealand. And she arrived in New Zealand on the 20th of November in 2018. And she went to the North Island. Okay, if you like it. and did a bit of touring around, and then she went down to Auckland on the 30th of November.
Is that still the North Island or is it the South Island?
It's still the North
North.
Island.
Oh,
North.
still,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Still North.
But it's down the bottom of the North Island.
Got it.
Now, Grace was staying in a hostel in Auckland because she was backpacking, and she was seeing the sights, which included checking out a Tinder for the local guys. Now, we've talked before about my experiences on online dating, and I did use Tinder once for about 15 minutes, but after I got some pretty gross dick pics, I got off it. I used Match.com and eHarmony and in my dating days, and I had some pretty ordinary dates as a result of that. But as you both know, I met my husband in the traditional way, out drunk, having a
durry at the front
having a
of
durry out the front of a diving bar.
That's the way.
Yeah,
That's the way. That's how it's done.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's really how you should do it. But yeah,
Absolutely.
I don't know why she was on Tinder. I just think it must have been a thing at the time, 2018. She's a young girl. She's traveling
They all are, I
around.
guess. Yeah.
Yep. Seems probably like a good way to meet
I feel
people.
like you do know why she was on Tinder.
Well, I'm not sure about it because of the kind of character of Grace. So I think she was just looking to meet people, maybe have a flirt, have a bit of fun. Anyway, she had obviously swiped right at some point as she went out to meet a guy named Jesse Kempson on the 1st of December. So remember, she arrived on the 30th. 2 days later, she goes to see Jesse, which was the day before her birthday. And they had exchanged some messages, and she had talked about how it was her birthday soon. And he was like, I'll take you out, I'll buy you cocktails, and he was a bit pushy. But to be fair, like some people have read this like, oh, he was really adamant, he was really pushy. To me, I just thought it was a pretty standard Tinder type banter. So Jesse was a 26-year-old originally from Wellington, but he was staying in a hotel in Auckland at the time. Grace and Jesse met up in front of the Sky City building where they had a nice Christmas tree and a display. And Grace took a photo of that while she was waiting for Jesse, and she sent it to her family. They then went to a series of bars drinking and chatting, and eventually they went to a bar which was a bit of a haunt of Jesse's. Now, the documentary is excellent for many reasons, but basically Jesse and Grace were filmed on CCTV throughout the entire night. So you can actually watch how everything progresses, which is excellent, but also really disturbing. It reminded me of that program, First Dates, when people, they have these blind days. Yeah,
I completely agree with that. Even the way it's shot and the way it feels, and I have seen the New Zealand version of it.
Yeah.
I totally know what you mean by that. I totally know.
So, because you're sort of watching it, right? You're watching it from that voyeuristic view of all the CCTV. Yeah. And you can see them, and they've got that kind of new people. They're standing at a bar, and it's like, what do you want to drink? And what do you want to drink? And then what do you do? And all of that kind of interaction is going on. You can't hear what they're saying, but you can see it in everything that they're doing.
Yep.
Anyway, so you can see they're trying to get to know one another, and as the night progresses, they're clearly clicking. Grace sent a series of text messages to her friend Amina Ashcroft, telling her she was on a date with a guy who was an oil manager and who lived in a hotel. And she made a quip about it being cocktails all night. And then she wrote, I'll click with him so well. And she ended the messages with, I'll let you know what happens tomorrow.
Oh.
Yeah. So they've gone to this burger bar, and I don't recall them eating ever, right? So they were just going on a bit of a pub crawl. So they went to this burger bar and they had some drinks, and then they went to a Mexican cafe, and there was something about him saying, I'll take you to this amazing Mexican place. And she's like, well, not for the food, but maybe for the drinks. So I'll take it. She didn't like Mexican food. Maybe also because she
thought eat was cheating.
She just done, there's eating is cheating.
Oh, she's had real,
But she'd done 6 weeks in South America, so she might have been over it by then. But while they were at the Mexican cafe, they drank 2 jugs of margaritas and 1 jug of sangria. So they then went to the Bluestone room, which is the haunt that I talked about. And it was at this point in the evening where things heated up a bit and they were seen kissing. And what I did note about this interaction was how he kept putting his arm around her neck and pulling her to him. And she was pretty pissed, I could tell. Like, they were both pretty pissed. But it was that kind of possessiveness and, like really pulling her into him, which made me sort of go, ugh. But, she could have been into that. At one point, she left the table, probably to go to the toilet, not sure, and he picked up her bag and went through it, which was pretty weird.
Creepy.
That was gross.
And then he drank from her drink. It's also because someone had served the drinks, and he had his own beer in front of him, and he picked up her drink and drank from it, and then put it back and kept drinking his own. I was like, Jesus, which is weird because I think he was paying for everything anyway, so whatever.
But But you do that in front of someone. You would say, can I have a
Would
try
you?
of your drink if you wanted to?
It was
Well,
the
if you
same
wanted
beer.
to.
It looked the same drink to me. So it was not like I'm trying
Yeah,
that.
right.
Yeah. I don't know what it was about anyway. It's a bit weird. But he'd also been seen at the same bar about half an hour before he met her at the Sky City, in front of the
Christmas tree
Sky
thing.
City
Yep, yep.
building. Yeah. And he'd knocked back 4 beers in that half an hour, just standing there on his own, like sculling. Suffice to say, they both had a skinful by 9:41 when they were seen at Jesse's hotel, where Grace went into his room with him on the 3rd floor. As I said, it was Grace's birthday on the 2nd of December. And so when that rolls around, her parents in the UK start sending her messages and trying to call her on, video calls and stuff, but they weren't getting any answers.
And that's a little bit later, right? Because
It's
New
the day
Zealand's the
after.
farthest point for it. Yep. And by the time they get up, so it'd be well into the 2nd by the time they,
Yeah,
or in New Zealand by the time they call her. Yeah.
Yeah, so from the time she went out on the date, there's probably a 24, 36-hour period, I think, before the parents really notice that she's not responding.
Right.
So over the course of hours, and I suspect a couple of days, they became increasingly worried about her, and they reported her missing to the police on the 5th of December, as they still hadn't heard from Grace, which was completely out of character for her. And her brothers were messaging her and her parents were messaging her, and she was not the kind of person who wouldn't respond. Like, she's sending him Christmas tree pictures and stuff. She's
And they
constantly in
messaged
contact.
every day, didn't they, for
They did.
the whole lot of
Always.
the trip? Yeah.
Always, yeah. So the police immediately did start to look into where she could be, and they checked her socials. And they saw the last post on her socials was from this Jesse guy. So one of the staff at the police gave him a call saying they were looking for Grace and could he please get in contact and speak to them. And he said, yeah, I can, but it has to be after work. And I think, as I said, it took a couple of days to get to this point. So we know it did because it was the 5th of December. And as it turned out, they were very keen to speak to him, as they also went to his hotel. Again, Jesse's seen on the CCTV walking up to the hotel. So the police are on the CCTV inside the hotel talking to the hotel people, staff, and Jesse's sauntering down the street, and he walks up to the front door of the hotel, and then he sees the police and he turns around and he starts to somewhat
I found that quite
pretend casually
disturbing.
walk away. Yeah.
Oh.
He's like, oh, police are here. So he starts walking away. Unfortunately for him, one of the hotel staff saw him through the glass doors and said to the police, that's him there. So the police then go out into the street and they sort of run a little bit and they catch him and they say, hey, you, we want to come and talk to you. He's like, oh, yeah, sure, no worries. So they take him in for questioning. And these interviews were also filmed, so you can get a real inside look as to how the police investigated Grace's disappearance. In that first interview, which was now taken on the 6th of December. So on the 5th of December, they've rung him and said, we want to speak to you. And he says, yeah, I'll call you back after work. On the 6th of December, they go looking for him and they pick him up. So Jessie tells them that he'd met her via Tinder and they'd gone on a date, which was pretty good. And at the end of the date, she'd gone one way and he'd gone the other. He very specifically says she went this way and points to his left, and I went that way, pointing to his right at a particular intersection. However, the police must have had a ridiculously huge team trawling through the CCTV because they were able to piece together the entire night with the two of them through all the various feeds in the city.
Mm-hmm.
In days, this is. And the policeman doing the interview asked whether they had discussed him going back to the hostel, because he said, no, she went back to the hostel. And he's like, well, did she talk about you going back with him? Because he said she was going to go to the bar at the hostel. And he said, no, we just had a little kiss and a hug, and she went her way and I went my way, and that was the last time I'd seen her. He said he went off to a sports bar and drank about 10 beers over a 3-hour period, and then he went home. So 10 beers on top of his 2 jugs of margarita, a jug of sangria, albeit shared, and at least another, so the drink that he stole off her, the drink he was having in that bar, plus the 4 beers earlier.
Solid effort.
Yeah. Then he said he tried to contact her via Tinder the next day, but he'd been unmatched with her. And he thought, oh, well, I must have done something wrong. Maybe it didn't go the way I thought it would. And then he also said very specifically that he had woken at 9 or 10 o'clock the next morning. And then he's like, no, I'm really sure it was 10 o'clock. It was 10 o'clock. I woke up at 10 o'clock the next day. So the policeman then sort of goes on to say, obviously we're investigating the disappearance and we haven't discounted the idea of foul play. So do you think it'd be possible, please, for us to get a voluntary DNA sample from you to rule you out, of course? I don't think he said that, but, Jesse agrees to it. Yeah, no problem. And he says quite clearly, I've done nothing wrong, so that's okay. Got nothing to hide. Then they leave him in the room for a bit, and he calls, and he's sort of sitting there looking like he's thinking, and he gets up because they've got him locked in a room. So he knocks on the door and another officer comes into the room and he says, am I being arrested for something I didn't do? And the other guy says, no, it's a missing persons case. And whilst it could be a homicide, we don't know that yet. And Jesse's like, oh, okay. Oh, sorry, mate. Oh, okay. Oh, like phew almost. Right, okay. And he sits back down. Now they leave. I checked the footage of the interview, and they left him sitting in that room pretty much for 50 minutes from the time the policeman first left to go organise the DNA and that interaction to when he comes back in. It's about a 50-minute period. And most of the time he's just sitting there he's very calm. Like he's not pacing, he's not standing up, he's not Jodi Arias doing a handstand. He's just sort of sat there. Eventually the officer comes back in and he asks him if he has a tattoo and can he see it? And Jesse's like, sure. And he rolls his arm up and he's got one of those sort of tribal tattoos on his arm. No problem. And then the policeman pulls out a CCTV still of Jesse in his hotel lift taken at 8:14 a.m. and he's wheeling a suitcase into the lift. But that tattoo is completely visible, right? So it's not someone else. And I think that's why he said, have you got a tat, right?
Of course. Yeah.
And Jesse's like, no, I'm sure I didn't get up until 10. I'm sure it was 10. And then there's this incredible moment where the policeman says nothing. He just stares at him. And you count it out, it's maybe 9 seconds.
Wow.
But it feels like 11 hours to the point where Jesse's sort of going, yeah, no. Is there something you want to ask me? He says eventually. And then the policeman says, well, you were very positive about the time you got up, and yet here you are at 8:14 with a suitcase. And Jesse says, which I still have. And the cop is like, yeah, where is it? He goes, it's in my room. And he sort of goes past it. I think he actually says, we'll park the suitcase for a second. So he goes back to talking about the timing of him being there at 8:14, and Jesse just goes on and on about this suitcase that's still in his room. You can check, Policeman says, can you explain the timing issues? And he says, I might have got the times wrong. Then he says, if you're assuming I was using the suitcase for something, I've still got it in my room, and you guys can have it if that's what you guys are assuming.
Oh,
awful, isn't it?
Yeah. So the copper then starts to call him out for not being as hammered as he says he was, because he's done this whole routine of I went home, I was passed out, drunk, and got up at 10. And then they get on to where the suitcase came from. And Jesse says, I bought it at the warehouse, which is a shop somewhere in the shopping centre near him. And the copper says, when? And he goes, that day. And the copper's like, why? And he goes, I had to move all my stuff out. Now I'm assuming he's saying that he's got to move out of the hotel. Then the copper's like, hang on. So you went to the warehouse at the atrium, and then he calls him out for lying as they have the CCTV showing him that he didn't part ways at the intersection, but they went off together. So you can see him. This is how dumb he is at this point. You see both him and Grace walking together along every street pretty much to the hotel. And so he's done this whole, nah. We parted ways. And they go, here's an image of you. Here you go. You were definitely doing this. So unsurprisingly, based on the fact that he's completely lied, they get a warrant and they search the hotel room, and lo and behold, once the old luminol was sprayed around, it became evident that there was a lot of blood in the bedroom, on the carpet, and blood spatter on the walls and the bar fridge. And, of course, that suitcase was in the room, just as Jesse had said. Clearly, the police have now really narrowed down the suspect list to Jesse as their key suspect, and they start to look into his life. Now, he'd recently lost his job for fraud and other stuff, and I'm not sure what the job was, but it sounded like something in sales or a call centre job, because apparently part of the things that he was doing, which he got laid off for, was like calling his own phone 100 times, which makes me think he was supposed to be doing outbound calls to clients and that. He was just fake calling himself.
Don't blame him.
I know. We've all been there, yeah?
I can't judge him. I was going to say, on that case, I'm also guilty.
Yeah.
Maybe not
Lots
my own
to judge
phone
him
number,
for, but not that.
They also alluded to, there was no detail in it, but that it sounded like he'd made up stories or lied within the work context, which created a bit of a toxic environment. So there was a bit more behavioural stuff around why he'd been laid off, but they didn't get into detail. So the police were watching him and surveilling him. Then they brought him in for a second interview on the 8th of December. And old mate changed his tune a bit. So he talks about the date, and he admits that she went back to his place, which is all well and good, but really their entire night is caught on CCTV, so that's not a revelation. We knew that. He then tells them that he and Grace were chatting in the room, and she told him she was into bondage like 50 Shades of Grey, and she wanted him to hold her down and to choke her. She allegedly told him that she had engaged in erotic asphyxiation with a previous boyfriend and very much enjoyed it. Of course, this shocked him a bit, Jesse, innocent young man as he is. Yeah. But he didn't want to disappoint her, if that's what she liked to do. So he did it. Then he described that they had violent sex, and once finished, He went and had a shower, and apparently he fell asleep in the shower. Eventually, he must have woken up enough to crawl into bed and pass out. The next morning, he discovered Grace still on the floor, dead, with blood coming out of her nose. He then did exactly what you'd expect a person who may have accidentally killed someone in the throes of drunken and violent sex. He went down to the shopping centre, bought a suitcase, the same suitcase as the copper saw in the CCTV lift footage. He then put Grace's naked body in the suitcase. Now, at this time in the interview, he's putting on the crocodile tears and he's sobbing and he's, saying, it was really hard for me because, it was wrong to put her in the suitcase because I just kept thinking about what we'd shared the night before. But anyway, I put her in the suitcase and the policeman is just taking these notes, which is, the whole thing's recorded, right? So the policeman's saying nothing, but he's just taking notes and just letting him talk. I mean, the guy,
so good.
This policeman, his interview technique is spectacular.
Yeah, I thought so too.
He's really on the
so
ball.
clever, like just letting him sitting with
hang
silence.
himself.
Yeah.
And he's a good-looking bloke, the copper. There's something about him. Like when he was staring at him in that 9 seconds, I was uncomfortable. I'm like, oh, God, this is a terrible situation. I would have broken out in a sweat and cried at that point if I'd been in that situation. Not Jesse, though. You've got something you want to ask me? Remember, that's what he said. There's a certain calmness to this individual.
Yeah, can we talk about the suitcase?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was dumb, frankly, because he's second-guessing all the time. What do they know, I think? He's like, what do they know? What are they aware of? So the policeman then says, did you kill Grace? And he says, no. And the policeman then says, you're under arrest. I think he says for the murder of Grace Millane. And then he says, now you're going to tell us where she is, or something like that.
Yep.
And he says, yeah, okay. And so he tells them where to find her. So that's Jesse's version of events. But what does the evidence tell us? Well, they looked at his phone records and they saw that at 1:29 a.m. on the 2nd of December, Jesse had used his phone to search for Waitakere Ranges and then 6 minutes later, hottest fire.
Oh.
He then did a bit of searching on Pornhub, which we talked about recently. And at 1:46 took a series of 7 intimate photos of Grace's lifeless body where he posed it to get the angles he wanted.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what you do when you're distraught and surprised.
Because you accidentally killed someone.
Someone's accidentally died.
At 6 a.m. he then searched, so 6 a.m., so that's like 4 and a bit hours later, he then searched rigor mortis, duffel bags with wheels, flesh-eating birds, and are there vultures in New Zealand? Then he looked for
just to be clear on that, he's from New Zealand. He's grown up in New Zealand.
No, he lived in Sydney. Actually, he lived in Sydney for his parents broke up when he was young, like pre-10, and he lived in Sydney for many years and he worked in bars and stuff, and then he'd gone back to New Zealand. So, yes, he's from New Zealand, but he actually had also lived in Australia for a period of time. I did do a bit of background.
Which also has no vultures.
No, but we have eagles and stuff and bin chickens. Yeah, don't get an ibis in your way.
Yeah. Do Kiwis eat dead bodies? Maybe you should have.
No, I don't think they do.
Well, of course they don't. But he was desperate.
He also looked up industrial strength carpet cleaners and car hire and beaches close to Auckland. 6 a.m. on the 2nd of December. This happens. So I'm going to suggest that he probably wasn't passed out in bed after his shower nap, as he said he'd been. No. He was then seen on CCTV buying the suitcase. He went out at 8 o'clock. He buys the suitcase. He's back in the lift at 8:15. Then
that's an early opening shop.
It was, and there was no one there. So you see all of this in the footage. You see,
I was going to say,
him going straight to the suitcase place and pulling it out. And I've got a theory about that. I'll come to it later. At 8:32, then he's out heading to Woolies and he's buying bleach and gloves, rubber gloves. Oh. At 9:33, he's in a car, which I'm assuming is an Uber or a cab, but it's got CCTV in it, and he's on his way to a car rental place. And then he's rented the car, and then he's hired a carpet shampooer, and he goes back to the hotel. Then at 3:57, he's filmed on another Tinder date.
Oh,
fortunately for the girl, one that didn't go very well. The girl in question said he was giving her bad vibes. He was talking about how all his mates are coppers, and the biggest issue they have at the moment is finding the bodies of murder victims because a dog can't smell the body if it's more than 5 feet underground. To be honest, like if that was someone on my first date with them,
You'd be quite like it.
I'd be like, really? I don't think that's true. I'll tell you about the olfactory senses of a dog in a minute. You should see what a cadaver dog could do. So maybe not
Also,
the perfect first date chat.
Hi, what do you do? Well, you know,
you kill people. I'm
just
here
to meet someone. Yeah. But why would you even get to that subject?
I'm not really sure because she sort of said there was a bit of like the standard stuff, and then it went a little bit weird and a bit dark. And he said that she said what he'd been doing all day, and he's like, oh, I've been trying to get a duffel bag for all of my software, softball equipment or baseball softball, I think it was. And I couldn't get a bag big enough. So it's almost weird. He's almost like saying he's skirting so close to the truth. I think if he's a compulsive liar, he's learned that if he lies along the lines of something truthful, it's going to be easy to remember the lie or easier to pass it off. It's quite weird, and there's no need for him to tell her any of that. So she said that his car was parked down the road near hers, and they would have had to go in the same direction when they left the bar. But she said there was something about him I just felt really uncomfortable. So she walked off in the opposite direction and just went up the street for a bit so that he could get in his car and go and not see her car and not follow her in any way. That's
clever girl.
Yeah, I think she just had a good sense that, well, he just was a bit off. I mean, he had just killed someone. Because he's weird and that didn't go anywhere, being the date, he then at 5:29 goes to a pharmacy and he's asking for something for an allergy on his hands, though that could well be a reaction to all the cleaning products that he bought. Then at 9:31 p.m, he's seen wheeling the suitcase and another case into the lift on a dolly. On the 3rd of December at 6:14 a.m, he heads out again and he buys a spade. He then drives out to the Waitakere Ranges where he digs a shallow grave and he buries the suitcase with Grace's body in it. He then takes his clothes to a dry cleaner and cleans the car, and he leaves the spade in the car wash. And then I assume he returned the car. The spade obviously being evidence, he's like leaving it in a random place he thinks no one will ever find. Now, I did read or see somewhere that someone said that the pharmacy trip was after the car wash, but he was actually wearing a suit at the time that he went to the pharmacy. And so I think it's more likely to have been after the Tinder date on the 2nd. That was the bit in the timeline I was a bit unclear on. Because after the car wash, he returns to the hotel with no shoes on. And he's got no shoes on because they would have been covered in mud because he's been digging a hole. Yeah. And he takes his clothes to the dry cleaners because, again, he's been digging a hole. So he's systematically destroying evidence the whole way through.
Evidence.
And suffice to say, he'd packed a lot into those 2 days on very little sleep. I mean, I had 7 hours sleep after the cast party and I was still pretty wiped out. I can't imagine I'd have the energy to even at 26 to do all those errands. Mind you, he clearly didn't do a very good job with the rug doctor that he hired because when the luminol was applied, the carpet lit up like a Christmas tree. So that's the evidence. That's what the evidence tells us. So the police called him, and remember they saw his name on the socials, and they called him on the 5th of December. And on that day he goes out and he calmly dumps her belongings in a bin in a park, very calmly. And then he goes out to some beach at around 6 a.m. on the 6th, and they think that he threw her phone into the sea because that's never been found. So that all of that has happened and has been filmed before the first police interview. I couldn't find it, but you know the whole thing about the suitcase, and it's that suitcase and there's nothing to see here, and I bought, and it's still there and you can come and get it and I've got nothing to hide, and it was in the room when they searched the room. I think that the suitcase that he bought and was seen wheeling back in at 8:14 a.m. was a new suitcase and a replica of one he already had that he put Grace in.
Yeah, I took the same thing out of it, that he had absolutely gone and bought a fresh one to leave in there so that
he did, but it was when
he would have.
It's the timeline of it, right? So that must have been it. Because at first you sort of think he's gone to buy a suitcase to put her in, because he said, I bought a suitcase and I put her in it.
Yes.
But then you're like, but there's a second suitcase. And
that was the
empty
one.
They filmed him and surveyed him for so long, of that whole period with all of the CCTV. I couldn't get a grasp of when this other suitcase came in. So I'm going to assume that when he moved in, he had a suitcase into the hotel originally, puts her in that one. And that's why when he goes down to that place, he goes straight to the suitcases and he picks one out in this particular color. Like he immediately knows what he's looking for. There's no like browsing. It's like bang.
Yeah.
It's the one that is going to replace the one I've got.
And why he's also directing the conversation to the suitcase when he's being questioned, because he's got a solution for that already.
He has, but also he shouldn't have said that at all, because they wouldn't necessarily have even known that they were looking for something in a suitcase. They wouldn't have known that any of that was dubious immediately. So he did basically go, red flag, idiot. He's not, I mean, he's meticulous, but I wouldn't say he's uber intelligent. So, as I said, they brought him in again on the 8th, and he told his version of events, and he did agree to tell them where to find her body, and they did exactly that on the 9th of December. I was listening on a few things, and I think there was some TikToker saying that she had been dismembered, but I don't believe that's true. I've read accounts from the attending police who've talked about what they saw, basically the state of the body when the suitcase was opened. And she was actually in a fetal position with her head to the sort of floor of the suitcase, I believe, obviously naked. And when they took her out, she was whole. So she had not been dismembered. But I mean, a fair piece of work to squash a person into a suitcase. And that might be why he was Googling rigor mortis, because he wanted to know when that would set in, because it would have made it more difficult for him to actually move her or position the body. And as we know, rigor mortis doesn't last forever. So whether he positioned her,
I didn't know that.
No, it wears off, if you like. And so it's possible that from the time that she passed, which we believe was before 1:41 when he was doing those online looking, so sometime between 9:41 when she entered that apartment and 1:30 or whatever it was, she most likely had been killed.
Online looking.
Oh, you know what I mean? Searching,
I
sorry.
do. It's like secret naughtiness. It's no, it's just. I
thought, what are you
It's a good phrase.
I'm telling
doing
you,
that
really
online
looking.
looking.
Bit of the story and they're doing the online looking, yeah.
That was just bouncing around in my head.
Sorry. Yeah, so like if you sort of think about it, he's looking at one something or other about rigor mortis. No, he looked at that in the morning. He looked that up at about 6 a.m. So she probably was in rigor at that point in time.
Hot as fire and all that sort of stuff.
She probably had rigor, I would say, would have set in at that point. He's gone and got the suitcase. At some point in his cleanup day, he's put her in the suitcase because he doesn't take that suitcase out until evening.
Yeah.
The autopsy findings were that she had died by strangulation, most likely manual. The timeline from the arrest to the trial is actually quite fast, and he ended up pleading not guilty to murder on the 16th of January 2019. So bearing in mind that he was arrested on the 8th of December. The defence posited that there was no intent to kill, that it was a tragic accident as he didn't know how to properly engage in BDSM and autoerotic asphyxiation and was just trying to satisfy the sexual needs of his partner.
I was going to ask, with all the blood and that was over what was...
I think that he probably beat her, if I'm honest. He said that she'd had a blood nose, but I think he'd smacked her around, and I think that was the blood. The mess was a lot. He also probably spread the mess around because he was trying to clean it. Okay. And so in particular where there was a large parts where the luminol showed it up, you can actually see swirls in it. It's like he's got a scrubbing brush or something. So he's probably spread it around a bit. But there was footprints back and forth from the kitchen in the cleanup. So he's walked through it.
Mm.
He's walked through water and blood, I'd say. And then so he spread that across. There was
that makes sense.
Blood, 4 drops of blood spatter on the fridge. And from what I could see in the crime scene photos, again, some on the runner board of the, the skirting board of the wall. Again, though, that could have been him just wiping with a bloodied
wet
cloth. Yeah. And the interesting thing was because the forensic expert talked at the trial, there's this big patch where he might have spread it round, but there's also a smaller patch with a sort of ring shape on it, and she thinks that was a bucket. And so as the waters and the blood dripped down the sides of the bucket, it's created that second patch. So it's not necessarily she was on the body, like she was on the ground bleeding out everywhere, and there's no drags or anything. This is all created through the cleanup.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So as I said, the defence basically said that it was an accident, that he didn't really know how to properly choke someone out whilst having sex with them, and so he just accidentally choked her to death. And they
that was what
his defence
said that. Oh, yeah. Right.
They used violent sex as a defence, basically, and they totally and sickeningly blamed Grace, basically saying she went up there of her own volition. She asked for rough sex, and so he can't be blamed for what the outcome of that was. I did read somewhere or heard somewhere that he had said, as I said earlier, that she'd had a previous boyfriend and she and the boyfriend had engaged in autoerotic asphyxiation. The defence, I think, tried to get in contact with an ex-boyfriend. They didn't, and I doubt that that was true, frankly. So the prosecution called several witnesses, and 3 of whom were other women who'd been on dates with him where he'd been violent. And the defence counsel, again, literally accused this particular very traumatized witness of lying about it. So, and I've never seen anything like it. Like, I don't care if that's your job and you are supposed to try and get this guy off. This man, she's talking about, I can't remember the details of what she was talking about, but he'd attacked her or he'd threatened her. And it might have been, she might have said, I just lay there and let him do what he wanted. And then I went home and I didn't report it because I was so traumatized. But she tells the story about this horrific date she had with this violent predator. And the defense counsel says, oh, that's just ridiculous, isn't it? Well, you've just said, you're just lying, aren't you? And I didn't have time, but I thought about taking the sound grab of that because you would be incensed by this, as I was. I just want to punch that man in the face so hard. And the woman, this witness who they changed her voice so that she wasn't identified, she said, I know what I experienced and you can't take that away from me. And this guy did it to me and I'm not lying. And you could see the face of the prosecutor in front of it because that's the other thing, Swanee. Yeah. Everything, the trial's filmed.
Wow.
So, like, you see the whole thing, which is just as well in some ways because this then raises this whole thing about the people of New Zealand were really upset about this horrific crime.
Yes.
And they held vigils for Grace, and Jacinda Ardern made a press announcement and she's, apologised to the family and said, your daughter should have been safe in New Zealand, but we didn't keep her safe. And, voice sort of cracks. And it's one of those wonderful speeches that she made in her term that made you look at her and think, God, she's a good Prime Minister. And we had at the time fucking in it Scott Morrison.
ScoMo.
Oh.
I haven't said that for a while.
Yeah.
But it also raised this whole question about how the defence was running this case and violence against women. It really it was like the Me Too thing, but it was very much about violence against women. And it really raised the profile of people saying this has just got to stop. The defence of rough sex has been used before, often successfully. But after the jury heard of his behaviour post the death, even though the defence were like, hey, he was traumatised, and people just don't behave normally in high-stress situations. So, everything he did was fine. And I'm sure the photos he took, as well as how he basically tried to hide his tracks entirely, led the jury to find him guilty of murder, as they should.
Yay.
Good.
He has been sentenced to life with a minimum of 17 years served. At the time of the court case and at the time of his arrest, the press had a suppression order on them in New Zealand because it's not a big place. And so he wouldn't have they felt that he would have had a prejudiced jury had all of this sort of come out in the press and everyone known who he was. Because, again, this is like, remember when Jill Maher, was it? Was murdered in Brunswick. And just people came out, like we've had several of these, unfortunately, with girls killed in parks or killed just doing things they should be able to do and not fear some fucking asshole murdering them. And the public, the outcry that goes with it. So they didn't want to tell anyone his name because they figured that he would never get a fair trial. As it turns out, some international journalists decide to release it, but whatever. But so after this, another woman came forward and she reported that he had raped her 8 months before Grace's murder. And his ex-girlfriend also spoke. She couldn't actually be a witness in or give any testimony in his case because she had a case pending against him. And he'd been horrifically violent towards her, threatened to kill her, smacked her around a lot, raped her. He was just general monster boyfriend. And she spoke very poignantly about saying that she knew because she had been in that situation. He choked her on several occasions to the point where she thought, this is it, he's going to kill me. And she said, I know what Grace went through in her last moments, and he's done the same sort of thing to me. And, you could hear her crying. She's like, I'm so sorry for her. I'm so sorry that she went through that. Grace's family were in New Zealand for the trial, and whilst they were pleased justice was done, nothing can bring back their beautiful daughter. Grace's murder has devastated them, and whilst the people of New Zealand were exceptionally supportive of the Millanes, it was still a horrific experience. Grace's father sadly passed away from cancer in 2020, and the family believe that the stress of his daughter's murder caused that cancer. The family have established a trust called Love Grace, where they raise money for white ribbon charities, helping women escape domestic abuse. And if you'd like to donate and support the trust, you can find details at lovegrace.co.uk. Jesse has appealed his sentence, but the court said, nah, fuck you, and rejected that. I personally think this guy is a real predator. He's a danger to society, and there's a part of me that wonders, honestly, if this was his first murder. Mm-hmm. I think there might be others. The way he went about it, how cold he was, how meticulous he was, it just horrifies me. And there was something else I was going to say about this douchebag. So he actually was found guilty subsequent to this trial for the rape of that woman, the one that was, she was also a tourist. He's been found guilty for that, and he's also been found guilty for domestic violence and threatening to kill and all the rest of it of his ex-girlfriend. So he's got subsequent charges against him, and I didn't really look into what the terms of those are, but I'm hoping that any parole board in the future looks at all of that and says, I don't care how much of a model prisoner you've been, you're not getting any out of here.
No.
And that is the story of beautiful Grace Millane, who was just having a good time. It was one of those disgusting things where all those internet trolls came out and basically said it was her own fault. You know, girls shouldn't do this. They do it to themselves, basically. No, they don't. Women, and I said she died by strangulation. They've estimated he would have actually had to have been squeezing her neck and cutting her breathing off for 5 to 10 minutes to kill her. That wasn't an accident. And
no.
I also understand that there's no forensic evidence that he'd even had sex with her, or she'd had sex with him, rather. So all these people out there basically saying you asked for it, you went up there, you engaged in, and even his own defense of we engaged in violent sex and it was an accident. There's no evidence that there was any sex.
Wow.
And the ex-girlfriend said, I reckon what happened is she went up there and he possibly pushed for that kind of interaction.
Yeah.
And she said no, and he lost his shit and killed her. And I personally think that's probably exactly what happened. And shame on anyone who thinks that a woman shouldn't be allowed to go into anyone's room if they've met someone and they like them and not fear being killed. Over to you guys.
Have you seen the documentary, Swanee?
No, I haven't, but
it's really good. You should watch
Having
it.
said that, I must have seen quite a lot of this. I've seen footage of him because when you started talking about it, I was like, oh, I could really see a lot of imagery, the edit of the CCTV.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen the whole thing, but and
it's really clear CCTV too. You know how often you sort of go, what am I looking at, you know?
Totally.
Really high def stuff, really good.
I do that so often that I think, how do people know? I think that so often I think I can't see that. How they see that? But yeah, when you can see it, I'm like, oh God, it's playing out right in front of you. It feels very voyeuristic when you see it.
It does. The documentary maker used the documentary as an opportunity to call out these disgusting defences of rough sex and talked about how there were 60 women who obviously had died as a result of this defence, or not the defence, but a partner who's killed them and used the defence of rough sex.
Yeah.
And in most of the cases, they'd either been let off or their sentences had been vastly reduced as a result of that defence.
I'm sure the defence would suggest that maybe they teach it at school thing, so Jessie didn't know quite how to do rough sex correctly.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
I tell you, you'd want to punch that defence. I mean, Jessie's an absolute monster, and so sentencing him, but the defence, there's two, right? And one defence lawyer, to me, looked uncomfortable with the whole thing, but the other one, the one who basically
was loving it,
victim shamed the victim and just said, you're an absolute liar. None of that happened. That's preposterous. Honestly.
I put to you or something, I think it was.
Something like I put it to you that's a whole lot. You're fabricating that. It's all bullshit.
Oh,
and I just was like, I put it to you that if I was in the room with you, I'd probably hit you in the head with a hot poker right now.
Yeah. What was interesting for me too is at the start of it, he turns up when he's being questioned the first time and he's well dressed and he's young, so he looks he's
quite good looking,
innocent, and when you actually start to see it all unfold,
his actions
becomes
are
really
terrifying.
Quite scary. Yeah. I thought the same. And then, of course, the way the whole process failed Grace and those other women until he was found guilty.
In fairness, the police did an absolutely brilliant job.
They did. What I'm saying is that whole thing about being able to use the
It
rough
shouldn't-
sex defense with no evidence.
That's the thing,
No,
with no evidence.
fact. We'll just make up a story, and then, of course, you
Never
see it
let
all
the truth
unravel
get in the way of a
away,
good story, Clarky.
well, kind of, but it's
What would you have played?
Imagine
what
being her
defense would you have played?
parents.
I don't. I mean, they would. It was horrible. It was so awful.
What I'm saying is, I want to talk about the reason I'm saying what I'm saying is about the family, right? Who are listening to all of this, going, what? I mean, even if she was into rough sex, irrelevant. But like you said, he had to hold her down for at least 5 minutes for her to die. That's not losing yourself in rough sex.
They said there was no defensive wounds, but from what I understand, chances are he was sat on her so she couldn't get up.
He was a big bloke.
Yeah. And she wasn't big. She was quite small. She fit into a suitcase. She was actually, I can't remember what it was, but she was quite little.
Got that going for me.
He would have needed some Yeah, exactly. I was just thinking he would have needed the biggest fucking suitcase.
I was going to say, I've got that going for me. I don't think I'd fit in one.
Nah, me neither.
That's a good defense.
Not even a duffel bag with wheels.
No.
Good defensive strategy. Keep eating the chocolate.
Correct.
But I just think from the family's perspective, having to go through that when you've already gone through what you've gone
when
through.
You've lost her.
It just, I don't know. The impression I got from the documentary was it was all just absolute lies. And
totally. That's what's called the lie. But the lie thing is also about rough sex as a defense. It's just all bullshit.
Yeah.
Do you know what? Life is always like this sort of, in these situations, sort of not quite sliding door moment, but as a parent or a relative of anybody, imagine thinking about her last moments. I would be inclined to think, I bet you she thought, oh God, my parents are going to be so upset with me. I've been stupid enough to go out with a guy and now it's all gone too wrong. I bet you she's thinking, oh, they're going to be so upset. You know what I mean? I reckon as a normal girl, you'd be like going, I didn't think I was doing the wrong thing, but it's all gone terribly wrong.
I don't know if she was thinking about her family, but she certainly would have been thinking, oh, fuck, this has taken a bad turn.
Oh, my God, turn.
How do I get out of here?
Oh, my God, what have I done?
Am I going to get out of here? And horrible, just horrible.
Yeah.
And I told you once about that shit date that I had where I foolishly went back to the guy's house, which was across the road from the Essendon Football Club, where he'd used a 2-for-1 voucher to buy our dinner. And we had a cup of tea while he slipped into a pair of trackies. And at the time I thought, what have I done? But he wasn't a rapist and he didn't try to kill me. But he could have. Like, my point is
Also,
that I
didn't.
did that.
Same here. I've made lots of decisions when...
Like that.
Often.
And sometimes you take a decision like that and it pans out really well.
Yes, exactly.
You think I've just met someone awesome or something. So it's not okay to say that you should never do these things and you put yourself in danger. In hindsight's 2020, right? You can absolutely say, well, that was a dumb situation, but that's life.
But
everything she did was normal.
But it doesn't mean you have to kill me because I have. Yeah.
There's every chance that she went back thinking they were going to have normal sex. And he gets rough and nasty and she's like, get off me or get away. No, I don't want to do that. And it all goes horribly wrong from
He
there.
was very predatory.
He was
I
just a
don't
killer.
know that it was premeditated. I think he was a rapist for sure. And I think he was violent with women. I actually don't think he meant to kill her. I think he had it in him.
I think he was always on a trajectory where if it wasn't Grace, it would have been someone else. From what I could gather about his character, again from the documentary,
and the more he got away with it,
if not her, someone else.
That was definitely the sentiment a lot of people have said. But the only other thing I did want to note was, and I don't have his name, which is bad, but the senior detective who you see a lot in the documentary, he speaks to the public on behalf of the case. He was very affected by the whole thing. He's extremely supportive of the family. And I think he also was ill. I think he's recovered now. But I just want to shout out for people who investigate these crimes, how affected they can be. And in Legally Blonde, just to bring it back to that, I've been working in that show with a couple of police people who are just doing theatre as well. And that's not really what I was going to talk about. But the other day, and this is before I did this story and before I looked at this, I was sort of admiring that one of the blokes who came along. It's the first show. He's never done a theatre experience before, but he did it because his 17-year-old daughter was in it with us as well.
Oh, how lovely.
Yeah, and you watch the two of them together and just the bond and the love between this father and daughter was so beautiful. And on stage, like at one point he does his little bit and he gets off stage and you see them backstage jumping up and down and she's out there congratulating him and, like, good on your dad. And it was just beautiful to watch. And then it made me think about all the memories of when you raise your children and they're cute and then they come to this age and they're young adults and you're so proud of them and they're going into the world themselves and you just love them to bits. And then some fucker does something like that. I can't appreciate how you can move past that. And Grace's mother has put herself into all those charities to try and get meaning and be able to move on. And then she's lost her husband as well. So I just can't even begin to imagine what that family's gone through.
And then slanders her character and her memory with that fabricated story. Like, it's like they're murdering her twice. It's
not just him. The fucking trolls on the internet.
100%.
All those horrible people who feel the need to put nasty comments on things. Yes. And I'm happy to send him to the fucking fires of hell, but he's also just doing his job to some degree, right? So I'm not saying that's okay. I'm saying he could have found a more sympathetic way to do that, and he shouldn't have treated victims of assault and sexual abuse the way he did. But he was trying to get this nut job off. But the people who are trolling online who just say things and they don't think about the impact on the family or anyone who's going to see that, just disgusting and shameful. Stop it. Just stop it. So to sentencing.
I really don't know. It's I feel a bit sick, actually. I don't know why. It's really bothered me. I mean, I do know why.
It's awful.
I felt like that after watching it.
Ill.
It was
very tragic. It was very sad. Yeah.
So far away from home, living, a wonderful young
living her best life, having a great time, and then
being brave, being bold.
That's what
doing
I said.
Nothing
there
wrong.
Are parallels of you and I going to London and going to England and doing the same sort of thing. Mm. So I don't know. I feel like maybe some kind of. Well, I don't want to torture him because I think he actually is into. Well, no,
he scares
the ex-girlfriend said he enjoys other people being in pain. I don't know that he enjoyed pain himself. So maybe I'll put him in an Iron Maiden.
He just sounds so terrifying.
He is. It's terrifying.
I watched a thing last night. It was just happened to be on after whatever I was watching. It was about a con man and in the UK and how many people this guy conned, but it was women and men and how he would present himself as this sort of character and he'd find, people who were really kind and had quite nice normal lives and then he'd not just sort of groom them, he'd groom their family as well and then was actually just a total con man, very young, pretending to be someone else.
Yeah, don't care.
Move somewhere totally different. Start again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's this idea of there are situations when you have an inclination or people tell you who they are and they are, but there's so often where it's just this fabrication of who they are and then you add something where it's so macabre and so dark like this and that is really scary. That's really scary because we all think that we're so savvy and that we would know better or whatever else.
No, not necessarily.
But in certain situations you just wouldn't or you're in the wrong place and she was.
I watched his behaviour up until they went into that room and I would not have picked that that's how it was going to turn out if I was just watching that.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's why she did end up there. Because if she had have felt really scared or
she wouldn't have.
Nothing would have gone, let me just
she wasn't the problem, he was. Yeah.
100%. And she doesn't see him going through her purse when she goes to the toilet.
Correct.
That's
those
exactly
behaviours that he exhibited that are
but she didn't say that.
Predatory.
Correct.
Yeah, of course not.
So what are you going to do with him?
I think he would do it again if he got the chance. I really do. I don't think he will ever be rehabilitated in prison. I think that there's something wrong with his wiring that makes him think that this is what he needs to do. I wonder about, the Bubba in prison kind of thing where he's subjected to violent sex upon him regularly so that he understands what he's been doing to people. I also think that another part of just how horrific he was his reaction and his complete lack of remorse and disregard for her life and her character post being convicted, that I just don't know how to punish that bit. There's the crime of murder and then there's all the bits that happened afterwards that make him an even more disgusting human than just a murderer.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah, and in this instance, you got to see it. I'm sure it happens all the time, but because of the video footage of everything, you actually got to see it. And that
Jeepers.
was awful, I thought. And I don't know how to punish him.
Yeah.
Swanee, maybe you do?
That's where I think this, when there's no remorse and there's no sense of whether he has rough sex in prison or not, I mean, it'd probably just make him worse. Do you know what I mean? He's just,
Yeah.
I actually don't know. I really do not know. I find him terrifying. And I don't know what his initial motivation is. Do you know what I mean? Is it that he hates women? Is it that he wants control? Is it that he's...
It felt like it was just more about pleasure than anything else. And maybe there was more to it, but it was almost like it was some kind of sport or a game, more like something that he does for fun rather than, any kind of revenge for depravity that were inflicted upon him.
Yeah, just sort of like, this is what I do. And, I may or may not, and Tinder makes it really easy for me to be able to find and meet some people and, no big deal and no big rush to get out and deal with it at the time. It's just like, I'll just take my time. And this is perfect actually, because her family won't be anywhere nearby. She's traveling on her own. I'll just take the time I need to sort this out and be fine.
Yeah. I think that, I think the documentary is a very good sentence for him. And I think
as long as you keep talking about it and getting people to watch it, he'll never escape that.
Yeah. And for that to be almost his lift conversation, when they say, if you've got 30 seconds in a lift with someone, what would you say? If that was the default 30-second conversation that everyone heard about him before they met him, it would be perfect if you could summarize that into 30 seconds so that everywhere he goes, everyone knows what an animal
That's interesting,
he is.
Because we quite often say the inverse of that, don't we? Where we say we don't want no one to know who they are. We want them to be no one. Actually, with him, you want everybody to be acutely aware of who he is, what he looks like, what he's done, what he's capable of, the whole story. And everyone's totally fluent in it. Not a little bit of understanding. It's like, oh, no, you're a walking monster.
Yeah.
Yep. So he can never escape it, and no one wants anything to do with that other than just be utterly repulsed and not terrified, because he's probably like that, but just
and also very clear on what an interaction with him could lead to, so that never again.
I'm putting him in an Iron Maiden. Oh.
Does he have to listen to Iron Maiden in Iron Maiden?
No, just the traditional, Iron Maiden full of nails, close it slowly, and that's that.
I'm having to look it up.
Oh, you don't know? What is it with you? You don't know ancient tortures, do you?
Tortures. Oddly, you seem like such a torture lover, Swanee. I don't know why you don't know not only current ones but ancient ones.
I was trying to find Maori, something to do with like Maori punishment, but I couldn't find anything on the fly, so I'm going to go with an Iron Maiden. I know it's, European and horrible, but it'll do.
Jeepers. Okay, fair enough.
Jeepers, yeah. Okay.
Well done. Good telling of that story.
All right. Well,
that was really interesting.
Thanks for that. Thanks for listening. And as we say every week, miss you already.
Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao. Bye. Thanks for listening to Trial by Wine. You can contact us at trialbywine@gmail.com. Please rate, review and subscribe to Trial by Wine on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support us, you can become a patron at www.patreon.com, Trial by Wine, or visit our website www.trialbywine.com to donate to us. Your support will help us cover many more cases and apply wacky sentences. We really appreciate you listening and hope you tell everyone about us. Our cover art is by John Christo and music is by Beauchamp from pixabay.com.